Assalamu alaikum. Hello guys, welcome back to the StudyTube Project. My name is Ibrahim Mohammed. I go by Ibz Mo online, and today we're going to be doing an introduction to psychology, specifically an introduction to behavioral psychology. Now, this is not going to be a typical Ibz Mo video or or laugh and bant, because I won't really have time to do a 10-minute video if I try to make you guys laugh. And also, the fact that I'm already simplifying this into a 10-minute video, I'm going to be leaving out so much. However, I'm trying to just make this video accessible to those who are new to psychology, who are starting an A-level or a degree and just want to know more about it. In terms of me, my experience with psychology, I did psychology AQA in my A-levels at B6 College from Hackney, and then I did my undergraduate degree, my BA in psychology or psychological and behavioral sciences at Cambridge. I just graduated last year, and I now tutor A-level psychology to students who are struggling with this. We have 4 assessment objectives of the day. The first one is to define what is psychology as a field. The second one is to define what is behavioral psychology. And the third one is to look at a theory of behavioral psychology. We'll be looking at the observational theory that Bandura created back in the day. And then the fourth thing we will do is look at a study to support the theory, and then we'll be able to critique the study, and I'll teach you guys an acronym on how to do that. Okay, so let's begin. And by the way, this is the brain. This is the frontal, parietal, occipital and temporal lobe. That is the cerebellum, and then this is the amygdala, and this is the brainstem. Each part deals with very specific and different things, but bear in mind that there are parts of the brains that we don't even know about. So it's a very developing discipline, and it's not just about can I read my mind. This is a picture that I wanted you guys to see because I've never done this before. Come on, art class, come on, art attack. Okay, so speaking of what is psychology, whenever you try to define it for someone, or whenever I tell an individual, oh, I study psychology as my degree, like I said, people always think, oh my god, tell me, what am I thinking right now? Can you please read my mind? No, I can tell you that your mind is basic and you're uneducated if you think that's what psychology is. Sorry, I'm a bit shady today because I'm not liking quarantine. Let me find my pen. Now, defining psychology is a lot more easier than people think. The way the APA, which stands for American Psychological Association, the way they define psychology is based on kind of 2 things. Psychology to them, but you'll see on Google, tries to understand the mind and behavior. Okay? 2 very simple things, the mind and behavior, the internal and the external. However, let's take it a bit further, because mind you can also break up into 2 separate aspects. One is thoughts and the other is feelings. So your thoughts, your feelings and your behavior. For example, let's just say I am thinking right now that the pandemic of coronavirus is really, really awful. Therefore, I feel sad when I think about all the people who have lost their lives. I therefore might cry. See where I'm going here with this? I think that Rihanna is the baddest and the best singer in the world. Okay, not singer, the best. She's the best in the world. My feelings is that I love her, and when I feel her music, I am so happy and I just want to move and shake my little ass. Okay, so thoughts, feelings, behaviors. What psychology does is it tries to explain why. Why do you behave that way? Why do you feel that way? And what has influenced your thoughts? But to take it further than just this, psychology also tries to explain this by using experimental or empirical research methods. So developing and using a research method to either identify or examine or evaluate a hypothesis, which is an argument or an explanation as to why you think this or feel that or behave in this way. This is what you use. Methods. Very, very, very important. And the empirical and experimental, because they are very scientific based. So psychology is understanding why we think, feel, behave using experimental and empirical research methods. Simple as that. Sociology, which some people like to compare this to, it's not the same. Okay, let me stop being classist. However, psychology is also made up of different school of thoughts, different approaches, because the reality is that there is so much that influences our internal and our external, and we divide those different influences based on a psychology kind of curriculum. The different school of thoughts that we're going to look at within psychology are, firstly, the biological approach. We're going to look at the evolutionary approach. We're going to look at the cognitive approach. We're going to look at the psychodynamic, the behavioral, which is what we're also going to focus on later on when we look at our theory. We're going to look at social. We're also going to look at developmental, and more importantly, they all attempt to look at psychology-based interventions, which basically means what are the solutions. So the first thing that we will look at is something called biological psychology. Okay, now what basically this argues is how we look at the hormones, or I should have said genetics, and physiology of the human body that affects the way in which we think, feel, and behave. And remember, biological, so this also accounts for the brain. Remember earlier I was showing you the different structures of the brain? That is biological psychology, which can also be known as neurology or neurobiology or biological neuroscience. Don't fight me, those who are actually from those fields and are getting mad as to why I'm generalizing that to psychology, biological psychology. But it can be. This basically tries to analyze the body response. The example I would give you that we learn in A-level psychology is the bodily response to stress. So stress, as something that we all experience, that we can even experience right now. Well, what the hell does the body have to do with stress, which is a kind of psychological thing? Well, believe it or not, but there are physiological responses to stress that biological psychology will look at. So, for example, pituitary adrenal system, which is for chronic stress, which alerts the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, which releases ACTH, which is adrenal corticotrophic hormone, which then goes into the adrenal cortex, which then releases corticosteroids like cortisol, which suppress the immune system. Listen, I had to learn this by heart in A-level psychology. I don't know if this is even how a medic would describe it. So a biological psychology approach talks about the mind and the body, how the mind affects the body and how the body can affect the mind. Please don't get it twisted. You will study this if you do a psychology degree. You cannot ignore this stuff. It's really important. Now, the second aspect of psychology that we can look at after biological is another kind of this one's very controversial. This is evolutionary psychology. Now, what this basically argues, it always goes back to ancestors and the ways in which they would try to survive. So these times back in the day when there was the caveman and the cavewoman and the cave non-binary, basically what they will be doing is they'll be learning certain behaviors that will then help them reproduce and will then help their kind of genetic line survive. Darwin, sexual selection, all that aspects, which is basically how does the past affect the psychology of the future. Let me give you an example. So the example I will give you is, let's just say we're talking about xenophobia or racism, okay? So an evolutionary approach in terms of understanding why that happens is because basically back in the day when we used to hunt around in groups, we would obviously want to be able to eat for ourselves and feed all of our people them in our little group, right? So when another group would approach trying to take our food, we'd be like, honey, excuse me, do you not see the queue? There's a queue to this food. Obviously these times there's no queue in evolutionary times, so everyone's fighting. So that sort of territoriality of this is mine go away, this us and them, this in-group and out-group and fighting because they see them as a threat to their survival, arguably explains xenophobia and racism that you have today, because maybe for a certain racial group they see another racial group as a threat to their survival. Very controversial because evolutionary psychology does not really give us a solution. So okay, great, that's how racism is. What's the solution? So it's interesting, okay? But that's evolutionary psychology. Then we're going to have a really nice school of thought in psychology, which is called cognitive theory, or you can take this further on cognitive neuroscience. What this basically deals with is how we as the human body and the human mind, how we as humans act as information processes. So that is perceiving information, paying attention to information, storing information in our memory, thinking about information, and also thinking about our consciousness. Or not even thinking about our consciousness, just our consciousness generally. All of that is cognitive psychology. This is deep. This is deep. What the example I would give you? Okay, memory. Again, and we do this in A-level psychology, is how do we store memory? Well, there's short-term memory and there's long-term memory. And within each of these memories, there are different models. So arguably, we can hold, according to certain psychologists, we can hold 7 items in our short-term memory before we forget it. And in long-term memory, they argue that we actually remember things forever. There are certain things that we can remember forever. An example I will give you is, have you ever recently listened to a song that you used to hear when you were a child? I guarantee that some of you now can still repeat lyrics from a song that you have not revised in the past 4 or 5 years, but you still remember it from back in the day. So does that mean that we can store memory for like years without even thinking about it? Well, this is what kind of cognitive psychology looks at, and this is like a very simplified, I'm not doing it justice, but this is kind of what it looks like. Then we have one of my favorites, which is behavioral psychology. Now basically what behavioral psychologists argue is that we are all, as humans, blank. We all start off in this world as blank slates, and as you go older, all of the behaviors that we convey is based on reinforcements, so people telling us what to do and what not to do, and observing others. And if we start off as blank and we can learn a behavior, therefore we can unlearn that behavior. So if you have people who have learned to have racist views, well, can they just unlearn that through education? And therefore we shouldn't be justifying people by saying, oh, they're racist because that was how they lived in their time. They're racist because this is what they grew up with. Well, if you learn those racist behaviors through observations and reinforcements, then you can unlearn it. So what's your excuse, Mrs. Racist? Interesting, I know. Okay, I'm way too enthusiastic for this. Okay, Mr. Sheen. Now the next approach we're going to look at is something called psychodynamic theory. Did I say that right? Psychodynamic theory. This is what people think psychology is. It's all about someone called Sigmund Freud, which basically talks about the conflicts that you have in your mind that you have repressed. Remember that brain, that diagram of the brain I showed you? Well, basically what Sigmund Freud and a lot of psychodynamic theory argues is that there is another part of this brain called the unconscious. Okay? And in this unconsciousness, you have suppressed some really conflicting and weird thoughts that society tells you is wrong, so you suppress them. For example, incest and wanting to have sexual intercourse with your mum. I didn't write this, okay? Because you know it's wrong, you suppress it. And this also, not just incest, it can be really bad trauma. Maybe it was bullying, maybe it was sexual assault. It could be anything crazy that you suppress. However, the mind is fragile. And so all of these different aspects of trauma or unresolved conflicts then start to stem out. And it makes your brain go crazy and it makes you do silly things. So some of your behaviors, for example, if you have psychosis, could be the product of an unresolved childhood conflict. And I don't know, I think that there is actually some validity to this. However, it's a very controversial theory because it is very sexist, and also at the same time, you can't empirically measure the unconsciousness. Remember how I was saying how we use scientific methods? You can't use a scientific method to measure the unconsciousness. So the only way to kind of prove this is by doing therapy and counselling. However, I think that there is a lot of validity to all these theories, but psychodynamic, I don't know, it's just interesting. There's not a lot of research on it because it's so controversial, but the modern research and the modern articles you see about it, I don't know, it's kind of fun, I don't know. Okay, bye. And then you have social psychology, which basically, This is seen as the easy subject in psychology that a lot of people think they're going to study when they do psychology as a degree. This basically, also known as social and cultural psychology, basically looks at why is it that certain individuals change their behaviors in certain group settings and certain contexts. So if you are in a massive group, why is it that your behavior is one way then to when you're alone? Why you acting bad for the camera, but behind the scenes you scared? Is basically what social psychology would want to look at. You're brave behind the screen, aren't you? But come to my face. Let's just say we were talking about aggression and the fact that some people, when they wear uniform or when they have a mask on, they act so aggressive. Let's look at police officers. Let's look at prison guards. What is it about a uniform or covering certain parts of you that makes you feel so powerful to portray such behavior, as opposed to when you're in a vest at home? So it looks like even power. How does power play a role? And the last school of thought that we'll look at is development psychology. What influenced your behaviors growing up? And so one thing that you'll look at here is something called, I don't know if you can see it, something called attachment theory, which basically argues that the moment you were born, you have a primary caregiver, which is most likely your mother, because she breastfeeds you, because she provides you food, and when you're hungry, you're upset. So when you get food, you're happy, and therefore you love your mom. So going from your mom, what are the certain relationships you have with your mom and other figures in your life, and how will your relationship with your mom play a role in future relationships? Attachment theory is lit. There are certain psychologists that try to explain how do we develop gender differently from when we're young to when we're older. So for example, there are theories such as Kohlberg theory, created by Kohlberg psychologist. He says that there are different stages when we're 1 to 3, when we're 4 to 6, when we're 7+, that affects the way in which we develop our gender identity. So it's really fun and cool, and there's actually a lot of this in your A-level and in your degree. So that is, I think, all of the school of thought. All of them are their own fields and they're all respected and they're all validated. However, a lot of them have criticism and a lot of them you can even bleed on to each other. Okay, so now as promised, we're going to be looking at a theory within behavioral psychology, and that theory is called observational learning. Okay, and this is by a man called Ibz Bandura, who wrote this in the 1960s. This is 1960. And this man is really famous, is really well known. And as we said earlier, behavioral psychology is also about how we as individuals develop our behaviors and our thoughts and our feelings based on reinforcements, which is either positive or negative, so rewards and punishments, but also observation. And this theory tries to answer some of the phenomena we have today, which is why do people commit crimes? Why do people join gangs? Why do people watch YouTubers? Why are you watching a study YouTuber? So Bandura argues that there are 4 main aspects of the observational learning theory, and the acronym we will use is ARM. I love acronyms, by the way. Whenever I tutor, all I do is talk about acronyms. Okay, so what does ARM stand for? Well, A stands for attention, R stands for retention, the other R stands for reproduction, and the M stands for motivation. Okay, now these 4 aspects of the observational learning theory is why we as individuals imitate other people's behaviors when we observe them. Okay, let's explain. So attention, let's just say you have a person right here and they are watching the observation of another person. Okay, let's give them a here. I can't do no stick figure, okay, just deal with this. So we have the subject and we have the model. So what is it that the model is doing that makes the subject so compelled to want to observe their behavior and repeat it later on? Firstly, Bandura argues that this individual needs to catch the attention of the subject. How do we catch attention? Well, you tell me. Why is it that some of you prefer certain celebrities? Why are you attracted to the people that you're attracted to when it comes to relationships? So it could be a level of attractiveness can catch your attention. It could be a level of prestige. Listen, Oxford, Cambridge, why are they called Oxford and Cambridge for a reason? And why is it that they have so much more clout when it comes to the academic world than other universities? Because there's a level of prestige to it. Relatability. If someone can relate to you more, obviously you're going to pay more attention. So for example, if I'm in a lecture hall and I have a lecturer who is boring and is quiet and who is just, I'm not really going to pay attention to them that much. I suppose if I had a young and dynamic and someone who I can relate to, maybe someone who's loud, maybe someone who's flamboyant, I would pay attention more likely, right? And you try to think of that within yourself. Who is it that you pay attention to more when it comes to learning or when it comes to your friends, and why? What is it about them? Maybe you fancy them. It can also be the fact that maybe they are someone you aspire to become like, role models. You pay attention to people because you want to be them. Next is retention. So it's not only the fact that you observe the behavior, you then need to retain it in your mind. So you need to remember it basically. And all that argues is in order to remember it, you have to keep doing it. So memorizing it will be one thing, repetition of the model would be another thing. Another aspect is also if it's very important to you. Let's just say, for example, you are so stern on wanting to go to Oxford University to do English, okay? And so you observe a study YouTuber who's doing English at Oxford. Every day you're like, girl, my goal is to go to Oxford, so I'm gonna keep watching them, I'm gonna keep watching them. So it's always in your brain, it's always in your head, because the level of importance of that model is really important because you want to go to Oxford and you're being reminded. I can't make it more clearer than that. The next thing is reproduction. So reproducing that behavior. So for the subject to repeat the behavior that the model is conveying, you need to have the opportunity to reproduce it. Let's just say you are looking at basketball players and, I don't know, someone is doing a sport and they're really good because they're really tall. If you're over here 3'4", you're not really going to be in front of the ball, are you? So you're not really going to want to repeat it because you do not have the opportunity to reproduce it well. You can reproduce it badly, but then if you're bad, why would you want to do it? And then lastly, it comes down to motivation, which is the key aspect of all of this. If you're not motivated to do anything, then you're clearly not going to want to observe, let alone reproduce the behavior of the model. So being motivated to do it. Well, what caused your motivation in the first place? Do you want to go to Oxford to study English because you love Oxford because it is architecturally beautiful? Do you want to go to Oxford because it is the number 3 uni, and therefore you want to say that I went to the number 3 uni in the world and you want that clout? Do you want to go because maybe your mom or your dad went there and you want to do them proud? I don't know what it is, but you need to be motivated. And let's just say you went to Oxford and you absolutely loved it. Then your model is now doing their masters at Cambridge University. And so you've been so inspired by this model that you probably might still want to observe them, and you might even therefore try to imitate their behavior of then applying to Cambridge University. And let's relate this also to gang culture, okay? So let's say we're in the Pembrokeshire estate of Hackney, where I grew up, and you are a young brown boy, and you see other young people getting lots of money. Okay, they've got all this drug money because they've been shot in left, right and centre, and you want some pee because you need money to survive in this world. So the individuals or the gang who are the models, you're going to pay attention to them because they've got that money. You're then going to retain that information because you're always constantly reminded that you're poor. Let's just say you go to school, you're bullied because you're poor. Let's just say you're watching all of these influencers who have so much things and you can't have them because you're poor, and therefore you feel sad. So that information of the behaviours that the gang are doing, which is selling and shotting drugs and things, is going to be retained in your head. Are you going to be able to reproduce this? Well, let's just say that your parents are quite liberal with letting you go out all the time. So if you're on the street, on the time chilling with your friends, you therefore have the opportunity to maybe reproduce the behaviour of selling and shotting because you're on the streets anyway. Then, motivation. If you then do the behaviour and you get money, and therefore you live your bougie lifestyle and you're happy, you're therefore going to be motivated to then do this thing again. But what if you display the behaviour that you've observed and you get in trouble, you get arrested, you get a criminal record, you can't get no job, you can't get no formal education because every time you have to submit your criminal record and there's always a problem. Are you going to repeat the behaviour? And that is observational learning for you in a disgustingly short nutshell. Now, how do we prove this theory in an empirical study, argues Bandura? Well, let me tell you about the study that he did called the Bobo doll study in 1961. These are very important factors. It was a laboratory study, so he did it in a lab where he could control certain aspects of the study. And those really important aspects are called the IV and the DV. I can't go further into this right now, but the IV is the independent variable and the DV is the dependent variable. The IV affects the DV. So what Bandura is trying to look at is, what the hell is it that influences kids to be aggressive? What is it that influences a certain type of behavior? What is it that makes kids aggressive? What is it that makes some people dumb? What is it that makes some people ugly? What makes it that some people have acne? And find out the solution and tell me. So basically, what is it that affects something else? Specifically, what Bandura is trying to look at is, what Bandura is trying to find out is, does observing behavior influence your own behavior? And specifically, let's say observing aggressive behavior. Does that influence your behavior? Does it influence you to become aggressive? So Bandura had 72 different children, all aged between 5 and 7. And he had 3 different groups. So there was 24 kids in one group, 24 kids in another group, and 24 kids in another group. Now, the first group, what they did is they watched a video of a model fighting and being aggressive. Okay? In the other group, they watched a model not be aggressive. They watched it maybe on a TV show, okay? And in the final group, they didn't watch nothing. They were broke. They couldn't even afford BBC One. So I have one group where they're observing a model acting aggressively. You have another group where they're observing a model not acting aggressively, and then you have a group where they're not observing anything. Then Bandura put each child into a room with a Bobo doll, and he observed their behavior. And you best believe all the children who observed the aggressive model, when they were in a room with a Bobo doll, they were beating the thing up. They were smashing, struggling, picking up all these toys to fight. Bad girls club, survival of the fittest, as opposed to the other groups where they didn't really act as aggressively. Therefore concluding that when you observe aggressive behavior, it affects your behavior because it makes you aggressive. This is what the Bobo doll study illustrates in a very simplified nutshell. But that was his study. Specifically, I guess something that you should know is that it was in a lab, which we established. There was also a equal gender ratio of 50% boys and 50% girls. Bandura also observed their aggressive behavior before and after the study. So even if a kid was naturally aggressive, well, he would have known that. But despite the fact that, even if they were angry, they became more angry after the video. So it basically shows that observing, girl, it ain't good. We need to turn off these crazy video games, turn off all this shooting and killing and all of these fighting and Saw 1, Saw 2, Saw 3, Saw 4, Saw 5, where they're all fighting each other, and Mortal Kombat and Tekken Tag Tournament, because it's leading you to perform aggressive behaviors. Or is it? Let's critique this study now. And FYI, if you are doing this in an essay format, how you basically write a study is you write the aim, the procedure, the findings, and the conclusion. This is what a paragraph will look like. You'll have 4 parts in the paragraph. The aim is, Bandura aimed to study ... He used this by conducting a laboratory experiment ... He found that ... This shows ... Okay, that's how you simplify a big study into a short paragraph. And the biggest part of this should be your findings. Aim is basic, 1 line. Procedure could be 1 line. Findings is really big, and conclusion, which is bringing it back to the essay title, is very important. People in the A-level exam, they tend to focus on this, describing what the study was like. Honey, we got time. Tell me what they found, because that's the most important thing. Now, whenever you critique a study, I want you to use another acronym of mine that a lot of psychology students actually use, which is called, and don't report me because I'm brown and saying this word, the acronym is GRENADE. Do not call prevent. GRENADE. Okay? What does this stand for? This is how we evaluate studies and evaluate theories in psychology. G, is the study or theory gender bias? R, is the study, does it fall under the realm of being reductionist? Is it a reductionist study or theory? E, are there ethical issues that need to be considered? N, is there a debate to be had between nature versus nurture? Were the kids in his study, were they naturally just aggressive? Or could it be that maybe their parents are aggressive as well? Did Bandura measure the parents? God, I don't think so. A, were there animals involved? There are a lot of studies in psychology that use animals, and there are two problems. One is that's a really big ethical issue, but also animals are different to human beings. The biggest difference is that we use tools. So tools, you can't really generalize if animals are aggressive to the way humans are aggressive. D, determinism versus free will. If you're gonna put a child in a room by themselves, I mean, what else are they gonna do? Are they gonna have the free will to be like, can I be let out because I wanna go on TikTok? Or are they gonna just have to do whatever you're asking for them? You're observing them. What do you think they're gonna do? They might know you're observing them. They're probably thinking, well, I've got to behave some way. Let me probably behave the way I watched in that video. And then E, which is Eurocentric. Psychology is a white subject followed through. A white subject. Cultural differences is something that is hardly ever accounted for in psychology. So if you can identify an issue or more within a study or a theory, does that mean it's valid? Does it mean it can be represented? And therefore can it be generalized? And therefore is it good psychology? And another criticism that I want to give you, which isn't really covered in Grenade, is called mundane realism. Whatever observation you're making within your laboratory study, does it replicate the real behaviors that you see in everyday mundane life? So you're telling me that we're gonna conclude that by watching a aggressive model at the age of 6, then by going into a room where I see a bubble and I fight it, that means I'm gonna be aggressive? Why does that study lack mundane realism? First of all, if I go onto the street and I go and fight someone the same way I went into this room and fought this bubble doll, it's just gonna stand there. Have you seen how skinny I am? This man that I fight in the street is gonna beat me the hell up. Could this bubble doll be possessed and fight me? No. So if there's no repercussion and it's a toy, of course I'm gonna beat it up. There are also moral and legal repercussions if I'm fighting on the street, if I'm fighting anyone, as opposed to if I'm fighting a bubble doll. Do you know what I mean? I can't be faced with a lawsuit. People aren't gonna be like to me, why are you fighting? Violence isn't the answer. As opposed to if I was on the street. So this study that we're using to say, oh, we observe aggressive people and that makes us act aggressively, is that really valid? Really? Because last time I checked, it lacks mundane realism and therefore critiques theory in general. And that is how you critique a study. However, is there a way to therefore build upon this? Can Bandura do something where he accepts that, you know what, a bubble doll study is not accurate, let me do another study? Can another psychologist develop on Bandura's theory and do a study that is representative of real acts that happen in the mundane world? And does that therefore mean the validity of the theory is actually relevant? And that's another thing that psychology is about, always trying to develop theories. Bandura didn't stop there, he went on and on and on, and there were other people on top of him. For my dissertation, I looked at observational learning theory, and even I tried to relate it to YouTubers, so it's still really, really relevant. However, how you critique it and you build upon it is a concept called falsifiability. Can you falsify something? Can you critique it and then build upon it? And that's what makes a good psychological theory. Is can it keep developing, and that is essentially what you are learning. You're learning about the thoughts, the feelings and the behavior, but then taking it further, you're also trying to develop these theories and these arguments that you're depicting and just trying to improve them and generalize them, and then try to hopefully have a psychology-based intervention which is a solution for these problems. So when someone says to me, can you read my mind? Sis, I ain't trying to read your mind, I'm trying to actually help the world. And that is your intro to psychology. I am so tired. I hope you understood anything I was saying. And now I want you guys to go away and I want you to look at any articles online about psychology and look at some studies and think, how does this relate to Bandura's theory or anything that we did in psychology? When you try to think of a explanation for someone's behavior, just maybe one of your friends, why are you acting like this? Are you using a biological approach, evolutionary approach? Are you using a psychodynamic approach? It's fun, it's interesting, and that is called psychoanalysis. Apart from that, you guys, good luck with everything that is happening, and I wish you all the best of luck in trying to survive this. And let's just say a massive thank you to all NHS workers and everyone who is just doing their bit in this world. God bless everyone, and fingers crossed we will all be okay. Thank you to the StudyTube community for setting up this project and getting me on board. It's amazing. Good luck, God bless, and be safe. Take care.